Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 6th of September 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish. We're also joined by David Scott. David, of course, bringing us northern exposure from north of the border, where I understand it's warmer than Plymouth.
I think so. The clown show continues, Brian. Not quite sure where to start. Well, we'll start with this. We mentioned on Wednesday the fact that the Court of Session had been hearing a case in front of Lord Doherty to decide whether the proroguing of Parliament was lawful or not, and he threw that question out. He said that this is political territory; the courts can't rule on it. So that case was lost. Well, this morning Sky News was excited at the possibility that Boris Johnson might have more bad news this morning, but unfortunately for Sky News, they didn't. So this was the court case that was going on today. The Queen on the application of Gina Miller versus the Prime Minister and various interveners, including Baroness Chakrabarti, the Consul General for Wales, the Right Honourable, I laugh at that, Sir John Major, and the Lord Advocate. So this court case also has been lost. Lawyers for Gina Miller, who brought the case, told the court that the Prime Minister had shut down the operation of the UK sovereign body at a time of political upheaval and crisis, and that this was unlawful. But sadly, the court, sadly for them, rather, the court decided that they didn't have a leg to stand on and threw it out. So this will go to the Supreme Court. The original case in Scotland apparently is going to the Supreme Court as well. I'm not sure whether those two cases will join up for the Supreme Court hearing. But David, since this all began north of the border, what are your thoughts on
it? I thought it was interesting that they chose to start it in the Court of Session, because that was the court, of course, that backed named person, and it did seem to have a certain pro-state stance and wasn't particularly interested in defending the rights of the individual, whereas the Supreme Court did much better. And that was the court that Joanna Cherry and others selected for their attempt to ensure that Parliament and not the people are making the decisions on Brexit. But notwithstanding that, the Court of Session made the right call. It's nothing to do with them. I wonder whether any court would vote for its own potential extinction by picking this particular fight. I'm not sure that any of them are quite that reckless.
Well, indeed. Now, of course, many people somewhat taken aback by the levels of chaos that we seem to be experiencing at the moment. But just since we're mentioning Gina Miller, we should just remind everybody, of course, that her campaign group, Best for Britain, is backed, as the Telegraph pointed out here, is backed by George Soros. And, you know, everywhere this man goes and his money goes, we seem to see this type of chaos.
Indeed. You need say no more. Well, and we should be seeing a lot more questions in the mainstream media and press about Mr. Soros and his power, but strangely we don't.
Yes, absolutely. Now, David, I wanted to get your thoughts on this because, of course, the Sky News this morning suggesting that Boris was preparing for more bad news. That bad news didn't come, quite the opposite, in fact. But the more bad news referred to the resignation of Joe Johnson, his brother, yesterday. Joe Johnson, Universities Minister, a cabinet minister, he sat on the cabinet, decided that he apparently had to make a decision between family and country, and he was deciding to fall on the side of country. Now, he had been part of the sort of group within the Tory party that was on the Remain side of this argument. And so perhaps it's no surprise that he's gone. And in fact, David, a lot of the sort of commentary from other members of the Johnson family seems to suggest that they're all on the Remain side and Boris is really the outlier here. But what are your thoughts on Joe's resignation and where this leaves Boris?
It's not tremendously important. The Remain side are going to try and play this with snide political comments such as, if Boris's own brother can't support his policy, why should we? The suggestion that people who are related must have the same political views flies in the face of considerable experience if you just look at the world around you. I don't think that's going to fly, and I don't think anything so trivial is actually going to work as a soundbite. And we're not in the Blair era anymore. I think real issues are coming much more to the fore, and it's those real issues and the future of the country that are going to influence public opinion. And I think public opinion is heading in the direction of leaving under any circumstances, quite happy with the New Deal, and becoming increasingly appalled at the way the politicians and the Parliament are treating the expressed will of the British public.
I think that's right. Are you in any way concerned that the bad press is sticking to Parliament as an institution, or is there a danger that Parliament is lost as a result of this?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a very pressing danger. I was saying to Mr. Ellis the other day that when the Scottish Parliament voted itself out of existence, the scribe who was writing the minutes of all the proceedings in this Parliament, a record which had gone back hundreds of years, just stopped mid-sentence when it was clear that independence would be lost, and the words just stop on the page, and it's quite a moving sight. But that was at least done in the open with a vote. Here, the Parliament seems to be removing itself by a series of cowardly attacks on the sovereignty that has been placed in its trust, and it's a much sadder end to a very noble Parliament. I seriously wonder as to whether, as an institution, it will survive in recognisable form.
Well, this is a good question. In the meantime, then, you're talking about cowardly actions. Well, of course, Boris is determined to try to press ahead and get himself a general election. He was pushing this out to this video clip. He was pushing out to the Conservative Party earlier today. But the UK's opposition party, so that's the Labour Party, the SNP, Plaid Cymru, have said that they will vote against or abstain on Monday's vote on whether to hold a general election. Now, this seems to fly in the face of of the attitude that Jeremy Corbyn was taking the other night, because he had stated in Parliament that, okay, he said to Boris, if you want to go ahead with a general election, go for it. But it isn't happening until after we get the bill through, which will extend Article 50. Boris at the time had said that he wasn't going to have any of that. The bill was passed the following day in Parliament. It was heading to the Lords, and in the Lords there was already talk of 102 amendments in order to delay this bill. But if within a matter of hours, that situation seemed to have changed again, and the Conservatives in the House of Lords saying that the bill would not be delayed. So it's coming back to Parliament, the House of Commons on Monday, and it's expected to pass. And Boris had indicated, Jeremy Corbyn had indicated that if it did pass, then a general election might go ahead. But it seems that they've reneged on that now, at least the Labour Party have, and they've joined up with the Liberal Democrats, the SNP and Plaid Cymru, as I say, they're stating that quite clearly that they will vote against any suggestion of a general election on Monday. And my question is, I mean, this has to be seen as an act of cowardice, but the question is this because they have recognised that they can't possibly win, even as a coalition, against Boris Johnson at the moment, because of the mood of people and their increasing lack of respect, collapsing respect for MPs in Parliament?
Yes, that's the only position that makes any sense. That they see the mood in the country turning very much towards get us out of this awful union, and they see defeat ahead. So they're trying to hold on to power, presumably using the Fixed Term Parliament Act, but it becomes ever more ridiculous as a position. I don't know if you caught any of Ms. Thornberry's performance on Question Time last night, where she said that if she was in power, she would go to Europe and she would negotiate the best deal she could get, and then she would come back and put it to the people and campaign for it to be rejected and for Brexit to be cancelled. And the crowd, the audience just laughed at her. It's not credible. It's not a credible position. And this is trying to block the will of the people by yet another means. And the more Parliament does this, the less respect the people will have for that institution.
Can I just add a bit, if I may, here? Something that we, the UK column, has been told over a number of weeks now. We've got nothing to back it up, but we'll say this is rumours from Westminster, is that Corbyn is being controlled, that he has a group of people who are around him. They are not very nice, and they are dictating what he can and cannot do. Now, I can't say whether this is correct or not, but I find it very, very interesting that this is what's being said. Why is it being said? And I wonder if it could be true that actually we have the leader of the opposition who's not even following his own policy in this case.
Well, what is absolutely clear is that his own personal position on the EU is somewhat different from the policy that he's presenting. And so then the question is that because he is attempting to keep disparate factions within the party on side, or is it because, as you say, there are people that are in fact telling him what to do at this point?
Yeah, well, we'll say the rumour is that they're not just telling him, they're in control of him, which would be a very interesting situation.
Well, David, Ian Blackford perhaps displayed the biggest dose of non-reality when he said that we have to keep the pressure on Boris Johnson. It seems to me that it is the opposition parties that are increasingly under pressure at the moment.
Yes, we'll come to more on Mr. Blackford shortly, but the pressure on Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson at least seems to have some clarity. We'll get into this maybe in detail, or maybe in the after hours chat, about what the underlying policy is, the policies that we're not seeing. But at least in the public sphere, he has refreshing clarity. We're leaving on the 31st, end of story. I'm not going to extend it. And against that refreshing simplicity, all of these games and plots, I think will be leaving the British public very unimpressed.
Well, indeed, here is News Talk here. Their headline is UK needs to be clear. It won't request rolling extensions to Brexit deadline. I think Boris Johnson has been absolutely clear about this, and so clear, in fact, yesterday he got so hacked off with another journalist asking the same stupid question that he said, I'd rather die in a ditch than ask for a further extension. I mean, I don't know how you can get any clearer.
This is actually one of the finest moments in British politics of recent years, because it's honest and it is clear. I remember when there was a dispute in Gibraltar with Spanish boats coming into Gibraltar territorial waters. A whole series of concrete blocks were laid in the seabed to deter the Spanish fishermen, and there was a diplomatic row, and there was the PM or equivalent in Gibraltar was asked repeatedly whether these would be removed, these blocks would be lifted. And he said, let me be entirely clear. And I'm thinking, he's a politician, he's going to lie. And then he said, hell will freeze over before I remove those concrete blocks. And everyone knew where they stood. And Boris is doing the same thing. And it's a wonderful sight to behold.
Well, you were talking about some of the underlying policies. Maybe this will give people a reminder of what one of the biggest underlying policies is Brexit Central. And the headline is, beware the threat to our defence autonomy coming from the EU, and not just in the draft Brexit deal. Now, this is Lieutenant General Jonathan Riley, and he was Deputy Commander of NATO-led ISAF forces in Afghanistan. He commanded British forces in Bosnia, Sierra Leone, Iraq, and was awarded the NATO Meritorious Service Medal. And he's writing at Brexit Central here because at the beginning of the week, he and some colleagues from Veterans for Britain, That's Gwythian Prince and Rear Admiral Roger Lane Knott and some others, were giving a briefing in Whitehall on the consequences for the UK if the defence and security sections of the current exit arrangements laid down in Theresa May's withdrawal agreement and the political declaration are approved. And he goes on to say, while the media overwhelmingly predicts negative consequences if Boris Johnson does not pass the EU's one and only deal, defence is an area where there are clear and unparalleled dangers for the UK if he does. Three principal parts of the exit arrangements contained in the political declaration would immediately extinguish our defence autonomy, and with it, one of the essential attributes of national sovereignty. We would be walking into a swamp from which it would be all but impossible to escape. Additionally, the legal knotweed which accompanies these three structures, which is scandalously given only a passing mention in the text, makes the political burden and attachment even deeper. So I do recommend people go on and read that. It is really the first coverage from some of the some of the retired military, which is quite as detailed as this. You know, the key point here is that, and maybe the thing that he isn't quite expressing quite correctly, David, is the fact that, of course, the divorce and the political settlement are two separate things. The future relationship, the political declaration, therefore, you know, even if we leave with a no deal, there is a possibility that, and a likelihood, in fact, that what's in the political declaration is still policy which would be pursued by a future government.
Yes, and this is the big worry, and this is why we're waiting to see what the substance of the Boris Johnson government actually is, because that political declaration surrenders this country's military to EU military union. In every single pillar of it is in there. It commits us absolutely. And all of the questions which have been asked in Parliament concerning military union, the answers that have come from government have all pointed to that political declaration as the legal basis for all that's happening with our military. So it's absolutely vital. I'm delighted to see the veterans focusing on this, but I'd be an awful lot more delighted if some of our leading politicians would bring this into the public domain, because any members of the public I've described what's going on to have been appalled, and they get it instantly, they get it immediately, that this is absolutely unacceptable. The British public, if they knew, would not entertain this.
Absolutely, and it is a matter of concern that even Boris and his team are not, you know, if Boris is concerned that he doesn't have support, if he's in any way in doubt about the level of support that he has, if he just talked openly about this particular policy,
it would change
the whole picture.
Yeah.
And it is a matter of concern, perhaps, that he's still, you know, nobody is still talking about this.
Well, we are hearing that the senior retired military people are getting closer to him on this issue. That's one of the things we are hearing. We thought there may well be a brief for the Prime Minister on this particular subject. That doesn't seem to have happened yet, but there's a possibility it may. So we'll see.
And they're reporting in our chat box that this morning Lord James attempted to bring this matter up in the House of Lords and was effectively shut down once again. So you know, they are working extremely hard to make sure the issue does not get any kind of public airing.
Yeah.
Well, Boris has been busy with other meetings, and yesterday he was meeting Mike Pence. So he was discussing the close working relationship between the UK and the United States. Of course, what's in his mind is the potential trade agreement with the US, and that's really what the meeting was about. They both said that they were very keen to go on with their negotiations on what they describe as, or what Boris at least describes as, an ambitious free trade deal after the UK leaves the EU. And they agreed that setting up the UK-US Special Relationship Economic Working Group was a positive step. So I'm not quite certain what the UK-US Special Relationship Economic Working Group is, but we'll do some more digging on that. But that wasn't the only person.
Damage limitation exercise,
possibly. But that wasn't the only person Boris was meeting. He also got together with Benjamin Netanyahu, who was visiting London as part of a drive, according to the government, to discourage world powers from dialogue with Iran. So determined to push forward with war with Iran. So he was in Downing Street with his preoccupied British counterpart, according to the media in some cases. They met for half an hour. They discussed the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And Netanyahu said that Johnson was a great guy for his staunch stance against anti-Semitism and support for Israel's security. And the statement from Downing Street was that they agreed on the need to prevent Iran getting nuclear weapon and to stop wider destabilizing Iranian behavior. And Boris Johnson apparently stressed the need for dialogue and a diplomatic solution. So what was going on here, David? Do you think, was he receiving his instructions?
What was going on? This has been settled Israeli policy for quite some time. About a decade ago, I attended a lecture in Jerusalem in English, given by the then recently retired head of Israeli secret services, military intelligence. And I saw this advertised and thought, well, I'm going to that. And it was all about Iran. And the view from the Israeli state was Iran is an existential danger to Israel. War is inevitable, and we would much rather have an international coalition to do it than have to do it ourselves. But either way, there will be conflict. So that was the policy. I've not seen anything in the intervening years that have suggested that policy is in any way changed.
Well, I've got to say, I'm deeply suspicious about the visit. You would have thought that Boris had enough on his plate at the moment trying to solve Britain's problems, and yet he's got time for his friend. Of course, in the background, we've also got Michael Gove, who stood on a London stage declaring his support for Zionism. I come back to this question of really how clean is the British government from interference by foreign powers, be that Israel or elsewhere.
Or the EU.
Or the EU.
Yeah.
But I just sense the timing, and this was simply about the Middle East. I'm not sure I believe that. But I'm concerned about other things happening in the country, and I'd like to bring people's minds back onto Extinction Rebellion. This is a little bit of a recap from our news on Monday, but we just took a look at the website. Extinction Rebellion, an international movement that uses non-violent civil disobedience, interesting word, disobedience, in an attempt to halt mass extinction and minimise the risk of social collapse. And we highlighted this report, Extremism Rebellion, done by Policy Exchange. Now, we've been pretty critical of Policy Exchange on a number of their reports, but this one, they'd really drilled into Extinction Rebellion. And this is some of their comments. The civil resistance model they espouse is intended to achieve mass protest accompanied by law breaking, leading eventually to the breakdown of democracy and the state. And they go on to say that their campaign is an extremist one that seeks to break down the established civil order and liberal democracy in the UK. Now, we highlighted that. We also showed some of the background organisations that are still there in the shadows helping to promote Extinction Rebellion. So we had Compassionate Revolution and also the campaign Rising Up, and they themselves got links into the Occupy movement. So why did we get interested? Well, this document was sent to us a couple of days ago. We're taking it to be a genuine document, but we've been in contact with Extinction Rebellion for confirmation, but we'll take it as it is at the moment. So here it is. Extinction Rebellion, welcome to the rebellion. It's time to rise up. There's a number of pages. This is just part of the introduction. Rising Up Network is coordinating a non-violent rebellion against the British government in response to climate emergency and the mass extinction of life we're now witnessing. So that's pretty direct statement that they are there to challenge the government. But it does get better. This is part of the direct action process. And if you look at the sub-headline here, it is this: the plan is for people to break the law. So there's no messing around here, Mike. They're straight in. The plan is for people to break the law. And if we go on through under how to get involved, they're also saying this: we need people prepared to be arrested and to go to prison. Now, I'm pretty confident that if the UK column was broadcasting or printing documents which was directly encouraging people to break the law, we'd have a visit by a local constabulary very quickly indeed, if not the Met and the anti-terrorism squad. But it seems remarkable that we've got this organisation that can simply declare it is going to break the law, and it carries on regardless. David, you're also, I think, concerned about some of the things that you're operating in you see operating in the shadows, but this is really directly on the table as far as Extinction Rebellion goes.
Yes, lots of things about this are troubling. The military language, they use phrases like mobilization. The nature of the organization, they've got little chapters everywhere. I was sent information on the one in the Black Isle, north of Inverness. It has its own little chapter, and these are cells of 8 to 10 people. The plan that you mentioned, the key point in the plan is a disruptive event of civil disobedience in London. Which day? The 31st of October, Halloween, the most satanic day in the calendar. I wonder if that's a coincidence. And then you then look at, you start to say, how do they organize themselves, where the money comes from. The money's a bit vague, but the organization, they talk about a national assembly needs to be set up, made up of ordinary citizens to agree on measures that will need to be taken to achieve these aims of carbon reduction and such like. So the aims are not to be questioned. There's no debate over the aims. No, the assembly is just on delivery. So there's something strange about that. And when you look at the other organizations like the Rising Up organization, they're also talking about how they organize. And it claims to be very localized and autonomous, and each group makes its own decisions. But then it says that the members of this group have to understand how they fit into the bigger picture and exactly what their role is. So it looks like a cult, is what it looks like.
It is fascinating, David. Well, we did what we usually do, which is we try and speak to people direct. So we called their press team, and a young lady told me, well, they did ask people to break the law, but she quickly got very flustered when talking to me and said she felt very uncomfortable. Well, since the only two questions I asked were, was it true that they'd suggested people should break the law, and also who ran the organisation? That was a question of transparency, but she wanted to run away rather quickly. In the end, we agreed that I'd send an email. So this is the email I sent. And essentially I referred to the conversation. I've sent them a copy of that document where it talks about breaking the law, and I've asked them to confirm it is a genuine Extinction Rebellion document, and we will see what they come back with. But I did get a holding reply, which is absolutely fantastic, because it said that they're getting just so much contact from the press and people, they simply can't cope with it all. So while we wait for a reply, they've suggested that I should visit each and every one of these websites to learn more about their aims. But I was fascinated to see it signed with love and rage, and I thought that was particularly interesting, because I don't think that's a normal sort of sign off for an organisation. It's certainly not a professional one, but there's an element of creating cognitive dissonance, I think. Love and rage, do those go together? Well, I don't know, but we're not the only ones that have pointed out that they're after people to break the law, because here's the BBC boasting that one of its journalists had been successful in working with Extinction Rebellion for a few days and was able to produce a report. And a gentleman called Ben Zand was the reporter. If you go through the BBC's own blurb here, you come out with this. Ben also spends time with a leader of the movement, Roger Hallam, who has spent years academically researching tactics for social change. He says you need 2,000 people to get arrested and 400 people to go to prison if you want the government to meet your demands. Ben challenges him on his methods and asks whether it's justifiable to, quote, encourage young people to break the law. And in the text that I've put on screen, it's a little bit small, but it is talking about a 16-year-old boy getting involved. So here we've got an organisation openly calling for people to break the law. I would have thought that puts it on the anti-terrorism list, Mike.
Some people in the chat box are asking why haven't they had a visit from Prevent?
Well, it's fascinating, but they haven't. But they have managed to go and speak to the director of the BBC. Obviously, he's got a great interest. I smell deep state involvement with this organisation. I'll say smell because that's as far as it goes at the moment. But how can you call for people to break the law? How can you bring cities to a halt? How can you plan mass demonstrations to tell the government you better meet our demands or else?
Yes, David, you got something to add?
Yeah, the Rising Up organisation quantify how much support they're looking to get. They say if they mobilise 3.5% of the population, they'll get the change they want. So we're talking about coercing the other 96.5%.
Yes.
Coercing, and what we're looking at is towards breakdown of society. So I'll just follow through on the BBC and remind people that it was only a few months ago the BBC were boasting that they were running a Radio 4 series which was about civil war breaking out in the UK following trouble over Brexit. So a little bit of forward programming there. This was the Independent's comment on that programme. The UK will descend into a bitter and chaotic civil war in a new dark satire created for BBC Radio 4. First world problems will see the Queen no longer on the throne as a post-Brexit United Kingdom is split up. It's remarkable that the BBC should have sort of had a feeling that we'd be getting into this more and more dangerous state. This is what the author says. I'd been interested in the idea of the UK descending into civil war for some time, and what's happened is the zeitgeist has caught up with me. Along came interesting political events and a sense of uncertain nation in many ways, and suddenly people got a lot more interested. So what he's really saying, I think, is the BBC scrabbling to get hold of this very dangerous material, but it's part of Radio 4's Dangerous Vision season, which sees contemporary takes on a future dystopia starting on June the 4th. So could it be that the BBC is seeing or planning for something we don't know? Well, the headlines are all here. We've got Will Brexit break Britain and would England care? And this one, Bad Brexit could lead to UK's destruction. Colin Jones, previous First Minister for Wales. I think, David, there's something exceptionally dangerous sitting in the wings at the moment. And as usual, the BBC is at the heart of it. But yes, the question is, why is our Prevent system not taking a close look at Extinction Rebellion?
Why indeed? There seems to be some organisations are more equal than others.
Indeed. Okay, if you like what the UK Column is doing and you'd like to support us, then please get along to ukcolumn.org/community, where you can join us there and support us in various ways. Your financial support much appreciated. We do need it. A quick reminder that GCMAF awareness event is taking place on the 11th of September outside Parliament. This is probably going to be the last day that Parliament sits before the prorogation. And everybody meeting there at 11 o'clock for an 11:11 start. And also a reminder that Ian R. Crane is asking 5G, is it safe? A number of events beginning in Bristol on Monday the 9th of September. It begins at 7 p.m. or he's asking people to come at 7 p.m. for a 7:30 start. And he's in a host of different towns and cities around the country up until Friday the 11th of October when he finishes this particular tour in Cardiff. So details at alternativeview.co.uk if you want to find out more about that.
Yeah, he's working exceptionally hard, it has to be said.
Yes.
To get around those venues.
Okay, David, let's come back to the Stephen Sutherland death and the case that is continuing to get headlines in Scotland. So cops bullied witnesses to say death was suicide, but families say it was murder. What's the latest developments on this?
This is an article from Marcello Mega in the Record on Monday, and it states here, calls grow for Stephen Sutherland's death to be reviewed as it emerges 18 witnesses complained about the police dismissing their evidence. 18. It's a striking bit of information. They carry on as the 6th anniversary of Stephen's death approaches. Family friend Sonia Adamson's story will add to the growing clamour for an independent review of the case. She said, quote, Stephen had clearly been murdered. Everyone knew who had done it and where, but the police didn't want to know. They wanted to bully everyone into saying he was depressed, that it was suicide. They were putting words in our mouths. Rather than gathering evidence and assessing it before reaching the conclusions, they did it in reverse. They started with the outcome they wanted and worked backwards, trying to bully everyone who knew Stephen into supporting that outcome. Now, my question is, this is not some plod getting it wrong. This is a policy by Caithness Police to impose this conclusion on the evidence and to harass, coerce, ignore multiple people in the community coming forward with evidence. I mean, 18 witnesses here, and I don't even think that's all of it. They were getting calls, they were getting tips, and it was all pointing to the same outcome. And they ignored all of it. And that's a policy decision. Now, the question I have is why?
Well, the questions I have, David, is this case has been going on for 6 years now, or at least the campaign has been going on for 6 years. The family's showing quite a lot of tenacity. It finally seems to be breaking the surface. But how many other similar cases are there? If this is policy, then it's very unlikely that it applies to one case.
No, in fact, there's another major case just along the road in Wick that's even older and has got another decade on this and involves many of the same concerns over the police.
Okay, well, let's move on to this then. Sorry, I'll just move back one. The SNP. SNP must act on smears. MP demands. What have they been up to now?
Well, this is a story we covered a few weeks ago, and it's an SNP MP, Dr. Lisa Cameron, who's an MP for the East Kilbride area, and she voted in a free vote on a matter of conscience against introducing a relaxation of abortion laws in Northern Ireland. And she was immediately assaulted online by hundreds of angry SNP supporters who were abusing her in most vile ways and threatening her. This original, the article here then talks about a smear campaign that was launched just a few days later. And this concerned a complaint that she had left confidential files in a constituency office. She's a clinical psychologist, and she's left documents relating to her patients in an insecure public area. And this went to the Health and Care Professional Council, and they'd planned to hold an investigation, but it was discontinued at a hearing in Glasgow, as the panel found there was no realistic prospect of finding the facts were proven. So this was based on nothing. So within a few days of her taking a stand on the subject of abortion, she first got a huge amount of abuse, and she then got an attack, not just on her political career, but on her underlying professional career. So this was extremely nasty, and she was asking for, the SNP, she was asking for the SNP must now take swift action against those involved in what was an obvious smear campaign, because the people doing this were senior SNP officers who had been employed by Dr. Lisa Cameron. So these people who worked closely with her, who turned on her because she took a stand on a matter of principle. The sort of abuse she was getting online was a huge volume and quite nasty. It included direct threats, and it included a lot of name calling, a lot of vilification, and quite a few comments that there's one comment here. I think if she can't separate her personal and religious beliefs from the safety and freedom of women in Northern Ireland, she should resign. Personal and religious beliefs do not give you the right to deny women an entirely different situation the healthcare they need. I'm honestly palpably furious with Lisa Cameron. That type of thing, she cannot have a stand on a religious or moral basis. That's completely unacceptable in the view of these people. She must comply with their religious and moral view, and she cannot have a different view. Otherwise, she must be hounded out of office and hounded out of her profession. Now, I wanted to raise it. I've been watching this story and I wanted to raise it again today because the Times has been excellent in reporting this, but also there's a few kind of slightly strange things that have been happening. Nicola Sturgeon has been silent on this matter. There was all this abuse being directed against one of her MPs and she was completely silent. So I had a little look at what might be happening there. Now Nicola Sturgeon went to Lisa Cameron's constituency and tweeted out a little message. And it says, had a great time this morning meeting the former Rolls-Royce workers now featuring in the fabulous Ne Parazan film who took a stand against the Pinochet regime in Chile in the 1970s. They're an inspiration, right? So, and out this came with a photograph. And she's standing here with these retired gentlemen who in the 1970s refused to service, I think it was service aircraft engines that were going to be used by the Chilean military because of the Chilean human rights record under Pinochet. So there we go. And there's Nicola Sturgeon standing with these four men getting a photograph taken. And if you zoom in on the photograph, there's a bigger version here. And here she is with five of the men. And that's all very well. But in fact, when I went to Dr. Lisa Cameron's Facebook page, she had another version of that photograph. And look, she's in it. So the MP was part of that photo call. That's how I've put a big SNP yellow arrow above her head. So Nicola Sturgeon's Twitter account cropped the MP out of the photograph. She's a non-person. So what's happened here is she's taken a stand on her religious belief that abortion is killing, and all of a sudden, not only does the leader of her party allow her to be abused publicly and threatened and all the rest of it, says nothing, not a word of support, but when she's with her, she's having photographs cropped so that this MP is no longer in the record. It's rather Stalinist, isn't it?
Yeah, so you've got this Stalinist image here, and
no, you see him, no, you don't.
Exactly.
Basically.
So this is the SNP in East Kilbride. This is exactly what's happening. So my next thought was, well, I wonder what the leader of the SNP in the Commons is doing, right? Ian Blackford. I couldn't see any record of him supporting or sympathising or defending Dr. Lisa Cameron. I did find, however, an article from the excellent blogger, the Wee Flea, who's a Free Church of Scotland minister and former moderator of the Free Church of Scotland, who writes extremely well and has been, up until very recently, certainly, a strong supporter of independence. So he's writing here and he's pointing out that Ian Blackford strongly supported this the women's right to choose an abortion. So he voted for liberalising abortion laws in Northern Ireland. Now, Ian Blackford attends the Free Church in Skye, and this is obviously completely in conflict with the beliefs of the Free Church. So the Wee Flea expands on this to some length, but this is an extract. On abortion, he says, the destruction of marriage is one thing, the destruction of children is another. You say you strongly support a woman's right to choose on abortion. Again, we simply ask, what do you mean by that? Do you think a woman should be free to choose to abort, that is, kill her child when they are 39 weeks in the womb? If not, why not? If so, are you really saying that it's SNP policy to support abortion on demand up to birth? And if up to birth, why not beyond? Why should a woman or a man have to bring up a child they do not want? Why not just get rid of the unwanted children? Before Christianity became the guiding ethos in European society, infanticide was normal. You think you're progressive, but in reality, you're just regressing to a Greco-Roman pagan view of the world. There are more than 100,000 people alive in Northern Ireland today because of Northern Ireland's abortion laws. Yet you voted to kill babies in the womb. Herod only killed 3,000. You have voted to kill 300,000. So I think that's very interesting. And I'm really curious as to how the Free Church of Scotland members in Skye are going to react to their MP being compared by the former moderator of the church as a much worse version of Herod the Great.
It's interesting to see people are actually prepared to stand up and be counted on some of these issues now, and it's also very interesting to watch the wobbliness that this causes people who think they're in positions of immense power.
Should we leave it there?
I think probably we better. We're run out of time. David, we know you've got more to cover. We'll save that for another time if we may. We'll thank all of our viewers today, and we will be back at the same time on Monday. Thanks for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.